Phil, I think everyone has decided that water is a tempo deck, and I really think that they're underrepresenting the fact that water is really more of a control color in sorcery. And I think that the magician build that you've been working on is actually a great litmus test for this theory.
Yeah, I have one specific avenue as to why I think when you position this idea, why I agreed with it, and it really comes around to return to nature.
Yeah, I mean, so we can talk about the inevitability of the deck and that sort of thing, but I think the elements that water represents are more based on control than they are for tempo. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you're able to remove your opponent's creatures with things like Riptide and Troll Bridge, or Koi Nixie and Thin Ice and that sort of stuff. But overall, I think the deck, like a mono water deck, minus like the Necro monsters, which is a known quantity and works well, but the mono water deck itself lends itself to long play and inevitability. And I think let's take a look at your version of the deck so that people can get an idea of what this looks like. Today's video is sponsored by Moxfield. They just dropped an advanced search engine for Sorcery the Contested Realm. If you want to browse every available card or dig deep with powerful search filters, head over to sorcery.moxfield.com. You can even click on the search syntax button on the main page to see all the terms you can use. And don't worry, when new cards are revealed from official sources, Moxfield updates quickly. Now on to the show. All right, so here's the deck.
Yeah, so I have been thinking, how can I make control, like in the way that we've talked about it, of a viable strat? And what I really enjoy about water is the amount of realm control, like amount of movement control on the realm that it has with all of its sites, especially with the addition of River Rapids and Innsmouth Dock. Then you have Maelstrom, and then Mirror Realm for any of those things, and then Payoffs for moving those your opponent's minions into different places, whether that be Troll Bridge or Thin Ice, or Watery Grave if everything submerges and then you make a bunch of tokens. So what I appreciate about the just inherent sites that water allows for is already some amount of board control, realm control, and removal. So at a baseline for like, okay, what can we do? You have to start with your sites because that's what's going to be the foundation of anything that you try and do. And there's a lot of really good action in water. Now, from my POV, when thinking, okay, what is the best way to optimize for control? It's really just playing the best spells that you can to then try and get to a position where Return to Nature can give you that inevitability that we've talked about on previous episodes. And part of what makes Return to Nature powerful is being able to recycle obviously what it does, but okay, how can we do that if we're looking to find our most powerful and most potent spells that we can recycle with Return to Nature more frequently, and that there's lensed itself towards Magician. So there's already the facet that I enjoy about Magician, which is you start up a card, right? You get to start with 7 cards in hand instead of 6. So you're already up a card from the jump, and in ways that like a Magician can't make up for as an avatar later on in the game of like recouping some amount of value. The fact that already, before you spend any resources at all, you're already up a card. So there is implicit value in that. Now
We should talk about, Phil, the other like unimplicit value of Magician, which is that when you're running a deck with so many one-ofs, in a 60 card deck, when you combine your sites and your cards, you're more likely to see your unique cards. So that makes your unique cards less like a normal deck. They are one-ofs, and they are one-ofs here, but you see them a little bit more frequently.
yeah. And also, because when you move through your deck over the course of a game, because when you return to nature, you're returning to nature into a smaller spellbook already to begin with, because your spellbook is already going to be like all of the stuff that you're removing from your spellbook. It's not like you're because there are sites also in your spellbook. Every time you deploy a site, and that's not something that is going to go back into your spellbook, you just mathematically already have a higher density of making your return to nature a lot more potent. Now, this version that we're looking at here, what I recognized was I really wanted like the speed bumps to like churn through early in the game to get to that position, to get to where my return to natures were just essentially being able to find me all of like the really powerful stuff. I'm talking like Polymorph is really good removal. Any of the Wrath effects once you're at 6 plus mana. Mesmerism is already insane, and like I imagine that if you mesmerism twice over the course of a game, like it's going to be tough for your opponent to come back from that. And then along the way, I just wanted speed bumps. And what I recognized in Magician is there really wasn't a lot of 1-drops there were no real 1-mana plays that were available that you really wanted to do. Like, you had Ring of Morgan, and that's fine, but that's like not something that you necessarily want to deploy on one. You're not really getting much out of it, really. Like, you're already at 20 life, you can't go over it. Like, if you could go over 20, I'd be like, yeah, obviously I'm going to put a ring in, and every time I cast a spell, I'm just going to start gaining some life. But since you can't go over 20, that seemed a lot less potent than I would have liked it to have been. There's no real combos with it. It's just sort of generic. Marine Corps, obviously, yeah, like getting additional mana on your turn one is good, but you only get one of those. And then I was like, I would like some more single mana plays on turn one. And then I was looking at Croaking Swamp. And I was like, okay, well, Croaking Swamp, just as my turn one play, if I can open in my 4 just start on a Croaking Swamp, and then from there, where can I go? That sort of led me down the idea of leaning on frogs as like just a theme throughout, because Gift of the Frog, being able to just like deploy a body that can get in the way of something to buy a turn, like I'm happy to just like put a body into play. If you want to spend removal on it, great. I'm not trying to spend cards on those bodies. But then just being able to fling frogs in the way of your attacks just to buy me additional turns so I can keep deploying to where I can then lay down one of these like bigger effects like a Mesmerism or a Call to the Sea, or if we can get to the real late game and start deploying a Wrath of the Sea, like the sweeper effects. I'm really interested in that. Or if you're playing red, then enough time for me to find a toolbox, crack the toolbox, find an extinguish, and then blow out your whole board, which is a 2 and a 3 if I can find it early enough. So it's like, I'm interested in these lines, and so like the frogs just making the speed bumps along the way, plus like the early plays of Polymorph and Sleep. So I'm like, okay, there's an early package here to delay the game, which is really all I want to do, because if I can start recycling Wrath of the Sea to where you can never actually get off the ground with anything that you deploy into the realm is just going to go underwater. As long as I can then deal with other decks that are good at being able to compete underwater, which is where then you get stuff like Mesmerism and Polymorph to like clean up the junk. Now we're talking. And what I really liked about all of this was you can then also control the movement in the realm while also delaying the board. I'm like, my sites inherently are going to allow me to delay the game because I can just keep chucking your stuff into Trollbridge, or I can just put frogs in the way and just like get myself to the 5+ mana range. And then I'm like, okay, what are the problems now that I'm going to have in water? So that's the baseline, right? All of this revolves around how can I optimize Return to Nature, because if Return to Nature replacing the most powerful effects that I have in the most mathematically effective way for me to do that, which is Magician, then I think we have the makings of a control deck that we can actually sit down and have a plan with every game, right? My plan is to just survive until I can start wrathing every time. Now, there are some things, some other versions of the builds that I'll talk about. Right now, this is a bit more of a token strategy because this is mostly untested in a competitive field, right? We're gonna try some stuff at Sorcery Con. But like you're seeing, like I'm playing 4 Fat Frogs and Torch and Pitchfork and Lord of Unland. Torch and Pitchfork really is just additional copies of Lord of Unland, really, if you're like only looking at it with frogs. My only creatures outside of Lady of the Lake here are frogs. And so like Lord of Unland, Torch and Pitchfork are effectively going to have similar effects. I liked Lord of Unland just because it was a body plus a thing as opposed to Torch and Pitchfork. But, you know, the Torch and Pitchfork go underwater. You can just pick it up and you're all well and good. And then it's just a matter of like, I'm maximizing on 4 Fat Frogs because that's really more of what the deck is trying to do as opposed to getting aggro with it. So, but then if you can make the bodies bigger, but that to me is untested. The other space that I can think we could go with it is something more in the heavier control game. And going back to the 1-drop conversation, let me know also if I'm bouncing around, because a lot of these ideas have just been battering around in my head, and I'm happy to talk about them on this episode. But other 1-drops that I was considering early when I was like, I want more 1-drop plays is the combination of I want 1-drops and I want more card draw, because the only real good card draw available is Manuscript. And Manuscript, obviously, with frogs, that's not new, right? Like, everybody's been plaguing with Manuscript since the game came out. Like, of course it's powerful, of course it's broken, but it's only a 1-of, and there's no way to find it faster other than trying to hopefully draw it and, you know, optimizing your deck to, you know, give yourself the best out. But there's no guaranteed way to do it. So I was like, okay, what are the other good card draw effects? And you get Sunken Treasure, but Sunken Treasure, you really only want like one water site, so you know where you can deploy it. But then also you're spending a turn deploying it, which isn't affecting the realm. Then you have to put a minion to go pick it up. And if they move to go pick it up, then they have to wait another turn before they can surface it. When they surface, they're exposing themselves, and they're exposing the Sunken Treasure. Like, if you don't get there in time and you're playing against opposing Submerge, like, they may pick it up faster. It's just too unreliable. But you do have other things like Salmon of Knowledge and 13 Treasures, which I also really like because we do have Dosmary Pool in water. So, like, you can just submerge 13 Treasures and go from there. That's also not new, but it is something that I enjoy. between Salmon of Knowledge and 13 Treasures, I'm like, okay, well, both of these are random effects. And so Kythera Mechanism is a great card. Love the Kythera Mechanism options with 13 Treasures. That's also not a new combo, but it is something that we could work into this shell. And it's also a 1-drop. And I was like, if I really want to lean into that, and I want to be able to shuffle all those card draw back in, because if I have a lot of dense card draw, draw threes and draw however many frogs I have, that means that I'm going to be turning through my deck pretty quickly. And in that case, I'm actually going to want to not only find my Kythera Mechanism more often to turn all of that on, because I don't want one Kythera Mechanism, three random card draw effects that I, then have a mismatch on. So I then started looking at Lucky Clovers. I was like, or Lucky Charms. So I'm like, Lucky Charms also a 1-drop. I can then have a high enough density of these random effects and then all the card draw, and then I can just start churning and make up for the difference. But if I can have the 3 charms plus the mechanism, now I have 4 1-drop plays that then any of my follow-up, whether it's a Salmon or 13 Treasures in turns 3 onward, now we're cooking, right? So that's something that I'm thinking about, but I haven't gotten to explore yet, because that, when you're playing with something where you're like A plus B and a lot of randomness, you need a lot of testing.
Well, Phil, let me stop you for just a second and talk about sort of the roles that controls played in Sorcery over the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So obviously Archimago was the go-to control deck. There are some other control decks, but Archimago was the go-to control deck. Specifically not a water deck, right? And so you have to look at cards like, Poison Nova, Earthquake, stuff like that, and you have to look and say, okay, those are some of the most efficient control cards in the game, right? So if that's the case, there has to be a reason why we're leaning into water here, as opposed to leaning into earth, leaning into fire, or air. Air draws you a lot of cards, right? So I think the thing that kind of got me when I was looking at this is if I were to build Archimago with water, right? That would mean I would have to lose probably earth or fire. And what would I end up replacing? What cards would I end up replacing Earthquake with? To me, Earthquake is the most important part of that deck. Like the Craterize is very good if you're ending the game, but I'm talking about just surviving long enough so that your end game can actually happen, right?
Dude, you knew me when we were doing when you handed me Archie. I remember I was like, I don't understand why we're playing 2 Craterize. I was like, you can flash the first one back. You never need the second one. And then, there's the density that you need to find it. But yeah, I was a truther in the same way. We were like, maybe we can just play another major explosion and get there.
Now, obviously, Mesmerism is what a control card, right? And specifically in Sorcery, a game that does not have a full turn of Summoning Sickness, where if your opponent plays a Dapperal Vampire and then on your turn you mesmerize it, you're allowed to start attacking with it. So that is amazing, right? So a card like Mesmerism is an obvious auto include into control, aside from the fact that it costs 4 water. So obviously Archimago, a 3-color deck, is not going to want to necessarily play that. But if we look at cards like Call of the Sea, which is 3 mana, 3 water threshold, a little pricey, but at 6 mana, you're likely to have that by then. And this doesn't target creatures, so creatures that minions that normally couldn't be targeted or that have ward on them per se still die to this card, right? Same thing with the Flood. Being able to target the realm as opposed to your opponent's guys is a great way to deal with creatures that have protections on them, like ward, or it can't be targeted, or just are recursive. This is a great way to be like, okay, well, if you're going to come at me with your sticky minions, this is a way to stop them from being sticky. The same thing that Earthquake does against those decks. Flood, Wrath of the Sea, and Call of the Sea do. So those to me are the replacement cards, the cards that allow you to stick to the game. Now, do they cost 5 mana? They don't. That is why I think the deck must play the Aquamarine core to get that extra oomph to get up there. And you're able to use your 4 fat frogs, your Plague of Frogs, your Gift of Frog, Polymorph, and Sleep to sort of slow the game down to get to that point. So I thought about this, Phil, and I leaned into this build a little bit, and I played a couple matches against Harry, who's also on sort of a more aggro version of Magician. So we squared off Magician versus Magician, and we played a couple other games as well. but I was able to go 1-1. So like I was able to go 1-1 against a deck that like I thought that the way to build Magician in my head was to be as aggressive as possible. Just go full aggro and don't even think about anything else. And that's what Harry's build is, right? Which is a great chance to test against his control deck because that deck has so much burn. It has ways to clean you out. And I also want to point out Great Drowning of Men is another card that in this realm of like, if your opponent has guys, especially if you have Maelstrom and stuff like that, you're able to just start pulling them towards you, and then they have to figure out ways to get out, right? Atlantean Fate being your 5-mana card that can wrath. So anyhow, we played a couple of games, and I was actually able to take this deck and win a game with it. We played 2 games like that, and then we played, I think, Necromonters, and I was able to win a game against Necromonters, which is saying something because there's a lot of Submergent Necromonters already, and this deck was still able to not outclass it, but I was able to overcome, knowing at my play skill what the Necromonsters deck does, and then being able to leverage this and draw. I won't say that I didn't draw well. I certainly did, but I did change a couple things in the deck. One, I took out Lady of the Lake. The only thing that I can say positive about Lady of the Lake in this build, Phil, is Return to Nature puts these cards in the bottom and it doesn't shuffle the deck. Lady of the Lake will shuffle the deck get those things into the deck.
There was some aspect of when an earlier version of this, before I moved on to like Lord of Unland and Torch and Pitchfork and really leaned down to the frog side of things. Instead of Croaking Swamp, I was on a bunch of rivers, and I actually wrote an article for it on Eternal Turtles, where I was like, oh, now that we have river rapids, and I wanted ways essentially to like sculpt my draw. I was playing the rivers in Magician, so I could like increase the math.
Put them up. Yeah.
And in this version, if you look at like the sites that we're playing here, I cut some number of the rivers to add the Croaking Swamps and then also add the Air Splash. And just for the curiosity, the Air Splash is only for stuff out of the collection. And it's because I figured that if I'm competing against all of my removal essentially is submerging, and all of my removal for artifacts is submerging. And if they just play an Omphalos, I was like, well, every deck is going to have an Omphalos, at least one. And if I submerge the Omphalos and they're still just outcarding me, that's going to be a problem. So I really wanted Disenchants. And also, I was already interested in Observatory as like doing the work of what rivers would do before I got into those rivers. So I was like, let me go back to Observatory so I can actually get the splash. Lighthouse is just a splash. So I have five ways to just get a single air threat, or 6 really if you count the Shrine of the Dragon Lord. But I have ways to get a single air threshold. That way I can turn on a bunch of cards in my collection. And if I have access to infinite copies of everything that's going on because of Return to Nature, then that's a potent thing. But I also want to say that I agree with you on the shuffle effect and why the shuffle is really a big deal for Return to Nature. There was a time where I was playing the Adept Illusionists, even though because it's an early roadblock anyway. Like, if they want to spend removal on it, that's fine. It's going to get shuffled back in from Return to Nature, and then the second copy is coming out. And then also,
I guess you could search your spell book anytime you wanted to just get a free shuffle, right?
So It was really just like, in my mind, I was like, I never thought of Adept Illusionist initially when you first got me into the game as like, oh, this is just a thing that can tap to shuffle your spell book every turn. But the fact that it can, I was like, that's actually the most appealing part to me, because especially with like Observatory and Kelp Cavern, it's like you can really memorize where you're putting cards in your deck and like how you're stacking stuff up. And so if you ever need to like just refresh that, having shuffle effects is really important. And so at the time, I was like looking at all of the cards that just shuffle a deck generally, and the cards that do that you would really want are like Highland Princess and stuff like that. But then once you start getting into double air threshold, I was like, we're just going to be unreliable in that space. So I was like, I was on the Adept Illusionist, and then I moved away from it because I wanted consistency, and I didn't want any of my minions that I didn't want to submerge any of my own minions and trade down cards, because I was always so concerned about cards.
My thought was initially I had the same call as you did. I identified Return to Nature as an Infinity engine, and I was like, oh, common sense, right? Like, that shuffles the deck. There you go. Those 2 cards belong together. I did not go in that direction. Let's pull up my list. I changed your list around a little bit, and so let's see what I came up with here. There's a couple things here that I leaned into that you didn't have. One, I think Failed Mutation is perfect in this deck, even though you're casting a lot of cards that like flood the realm or flood and will end up submerging this guy. It doesn't turn on any of your opponent's removal, which is I think one of the biggest conceits of this deck. If your opponent draws a berry, if your opponent draws even a drown against most of your guys, it's just useless against you, right? So like there are a lot of cards that your opponent would have that would kill minions. They can't use those against Failed Mutation. They can attack into it and violent it, which happened to me. But with Return to Nature, you get to get those guys back eventually, and your opponent will over time be in a situation where they have a group full of cards that target things that they can't use. And hopefully, the idea is that having Failed Mutation allows you to have both a speed bump that will stop early minions at like a 3 power.
Zach, just on this list as people are looking, you should be cutting the one torch and pitchfork for the mesmerism.
Yes, I apparently missed a mesmerism here. There was a mesmerism in here.
We were cutting 4 waters, yeah.
Yeah, we're cutting 4 waters for that. There is a mesmerism in this deck.
Yeah,
you need one. If you're mono water and you're not playing mesmerism, what are you doing?
My take with in Failed Mutation, and this is where like we're gonna get in a bunch of testing before Sorcery Con and trying Failed Mutation out, is I have like inherently such a concern about how many 4-drops we can afford in Magician, because you're like I'm so much more on like if I wanted to add another 4-drop and like additional space for that, the places that I would really look to go are like I'm looking at like a Mortal Throne and adding Great Old One as a way to like just have more card draw.
That's a whole different build. Yeah,
that's a different build. Well, like if you look at the current list that we have here, between yours and mine, it's like if we were to add the Throne and then just add Great Old One, there's at least the 8-drop that you can use to like win the game with the Throne if you wanted to get there. But also
you don't need an 8-drop for Mortal Throne. 7 gets you there. 7 puts the 8th thing on there.
But like even just like a Mortal Throne just being additional like really good card draw. And then there were also the times where it's like, oh, you can't there's no way to win if the Throne is submerged because you can't sit your avatar underneath the realm. Now we have Dredge, and Dredge draws a card and can pull the Throne up.
Lift it up.
Yeah. And there's that space where I'm like, I would think more in that space before going to Fail Mutation. But then you've had like a pretty solid argument for Fail Mutation, and you've been impressed by it, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. The thing about Failed Mutation is sure, it can be a win condition. That's fine. Really, what it is a speed bump that your opponent cannot get off of the board unless they attack into it, lose a guy, and then use another card to like like a Violent or something like that. And all of that is to say the card gains you life, lets you sit on the board for longer, right? If they're like, oh, I can't attack into here because your Failed Mutation might swing over here and block, or there because my Wild Horse, my War Horse wants to go here, or my Pukas want to go here, or my Red Cap wants to. Red Cap just dies. Like Red Cap, they can't even play. They just have to hold it in their hand and wait, right? So the idea here is that if we play Failed Mutation, it's a card that doesn't allow them to recoup any of the value that they already have. Like this is what I was talking about with like I forget what the other card was that we were talking about, like that turned on the removal. What was that?
Illusionist Adept.
Illusionist Adept turns on the removal. Like a lot of cards just turn the removal on, and it's like they were just waiting to get value out of that removal.
Mother Maiden Crone.
Yeah, Mother Maiden Crone was the card we were actually talking about. I think before the show, you were like, "Did you see that a value in that?" I was like, "The card's great. Like Mother Maiden Crone's wonderful, and of course, if your opponent doesn't remove it, awesome, right? And if they do remove it later on, and you've recouped a couple cards off it, awesome. But it's just like a lightning rod for every piece of removal that's been sitting in their hand, waiting to be useful. And all you're doing is saying, pay 5 life, draw a card, make your opponent discard a card, or gain 3 life. Pay 5 mana, gain 3 life, make your opponent discard a card.
Yeah, and that's the argument for where because this is a best of one game. If you can actually turn, like, if they have to spend, if their removal, which they'll always have targets for, because, like, whether it's frogs or whatever, like, the fact that this is a best of one game, they can't board the removal out. If you can just make all of those, like, really subpar trades going along, those are the increments that are going to matter. Like, if we were playing chess, and it's just like, by having
If your
subpar
opponent can't
removal.
use any of their pawns in chess, right?
So
Like
the
that's
way that
kind
I
of what you're
think
doing.
the way that I think about like building a control deck to like obfuscate the removal in a way that just makes it like really terrible for them to have anytime they draw is like imagine if you're playing chess and your opponent just always has doubled pawns. Like they just always have this weakness. Like yes, it will be able to do something, but it's just not going to be anywhere near as powerful, and you get to exploit it in a lot of positions, right? They're going to draw removal when they're like, "There's just nothing for me to do with this." Like, and they're going to have to like protect this doubled pawn that they like is just really messing with their otherwise the rest of their structure. And so the potency of being able to keep it so that the removal can never actually convert in a way that they want is also why cards like Lilith aren't in here, or questing beast, or any of like the other like big thick creatures that like are really overpowered for what they cost or what they do, or like advantage that they might gain, only because the offsetting of being able to, for their mana on their removal to trade up or at parity with yours is just wholly against what the theory behind the strategy is.
Yeah. Now, so just to give people an idea of how this deck wins, right? So I was able to just put out a pitchfork onto, I got to cast Plague of Frogs. I had a couple frogs out already. Threw a pitchfork down, and then hit for 7, untapped, hit for 7 again. My opponent can only block, like even if they have like a couple of guys out, they can only block one guy at a time. Every one of your guys just has like a body, and then they're like, oh, do I get rid of their bodies? Now, of course, look, a desert can screw you up. You have to be very careful about where your guys are. If there's a void near you, they can desert and stuff like that. But the idea is that for the most part in this game, you're just sitting back and making trading card for card, making sure that your opponent doesn't you don't know. This is the problem. You don't know how many cards in your opponent's hand are worthless against you, but you can assume some number are, because they're playing cards that target like big minions to get them out of the way, or like they're playing burn that they want to target your minions with that just aren't that good. And so what happens is they might have a grip of 4 or 5 cards, but you've effectively made them discard a couple of those cards while you're playing, because they can't target a guy that's submerged because they don't have a spellcaster underneath, or they can't target your failed mutation, or you're at you have an angel's egg out and your life total's too high, or playing another minion right now would be stupid because they've seen you do Call of the Sea and they're assuming you have something else in your hand. So the whole idea is to just outlast your opponent with this deck. And the nice thing about Failed Mutation is, yeah, it can turn the corner and start attacking. But really what it does is it puts your opponent in a situation where they can't get rid of this thing and they have to trade a couple of cards for it. For the most part, like, of course, they can attack in with a vampire and kill it. But I think in that scenario, you're content to trade a Failed Mutation for a vampire. And it's mana efficient. At 4 mana for a 4 that can't be targeted, you're basically playing a Morphling if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, and I'm in this space where like I need to test this out, because Failed Mutation is just wasn't even on my list, like my short list of cards to try. Like I'm over here thinking of the card draw stuff that I was talking about, or I'm also over here thinking on the reason for removal. Like yes, Lord of Unland can exist submerged when you cast it, but I'm like, am I even supposed to be looking at Lord of Unland as a lord for these frogs before I max out on pitchforks? Like,
Well, you have the pitchfork in the board, right? Like I think that's fine.
So I have 2 Torch and Pitchforks main, 1 in the collection, the 3 toolbox obviously. But I'm like, the Torch and Pitchfork is exceptional? No.
No, it's common. You can, it's ordinary. You can use it.
That's what I mean. Like I'm over here looking at like you're saying like Failed Mutation is really the next step of the deck, and I'm over here being like, I don't know. I think I'm supposed to cut Lord of Unland for the 3rd Torch and Pitchfork main before I'm like looking at other minions.
I mean, I like both Lord of Unland and Torch and Pitchfork. They seemed great. There might be an argument here on some of the other cards in the deck. Like it's a tight list, right? There's not a lot you can cut. You can see that I've added Deep Seas. The other thing that I added that you didn't have, that we did talk about, was I added Island Leviathans.
Yeah,
like you're a mono water deck, right? Like these are giant beaters that like if you just put those up on your front line, that's 8 damage, right? Like boom. That gets your opponent pretty low. Now, yeah, of course, they do have something they can do about that. They can it doesn't have submerge, so yeah, they can
Yeah.
drown it or whatever. But like, they do have to get rid of the Island Leviathan, and it's basically a free card, because if you get to the point where your land is just an 8 mana guy that like is ready to attack, or an 8 power guy that's ready to attack, uh, it's gonna be a situation where your opponent's like, oh man, they're getting really close to turning that thing on, and with deep seas, you get close pretty fast.
Yeah,
Um,
my thoughts on Island Leviathan, and I agree, it's absolutely a consideration because it's obviously very powerful,
and you
particularly
shuffle it
because
back in with return
and then you
natures.
shuffle it back in. My thought against it was, or why I didn't include it in my list so far, is I agree that you would want some number of deep sea if you're playing it just to more reliably get there, in a reasonable time frame. But at the same time, with the theory of the deck being like, as long as I'm not dead, I'm winning. And I didn't, outside of like Island Leviathan functioning essentially as like a removal spell, right? Like it just be a big, thick boy that just gets to attack in and kill something. Beyond that, I didn't think, like, I was like, do I want another removal spell is what I was looking at it. Because in my mind, I was like, I don't need a threat because as long as I'm not dead, I will win. So in my mind, I was like, it's similar to like any of the other cards that I would put in a list, a control list like this that's leaning on return to nature as its like inevitability win condition. Is I go, what problem is this solving for me? Now there may just be a world where they're like, hey dude, like, if you're not going to play a symmetrical suffering or whatever, and then your opponent just plays Dillman or whatever, and Demon of Dillman doesn't care about your wrath effects because it can't be moved anywhere. It's like, okay,
the
well,
beauty is it can be blocked infinitely with frogs, though.
right, yeah. But like if there was some weird like corner case where it's like, oh, me including an Island Leviathan or anything else is a low enough cost, right? Like I'm happy to just have sites that are producing water for me anyway that give me utility that my opponent might have to play around. But if it's also in my head, if somebody deploys something, I go, oh, that's okay. I have a plan for that, and that plan is this thing that I now just need to dig for. That like would open my mind up a little bit more to it. Otherwise, I think that the concessions that I would make by including Deep Sea and Island Leviathan, like I can see here, like the cut that you had to make was
I got rid of the pool, the Dozmary pool.
Yeah, you cut the Dosmary pool, which to me is a mana jump for any of the things that I would want to do. Like getting a torch and pitchfork down off a Dosmary pool for free, and then just getting in there, plus being able to two spell. That's really to me that's a huge thing. If that's what the world that we're in. Same thing. You cut an observatory. I'm on the side of like one of the observatories.
I brainstorm locked myself, so I was really down on.
Yeah, totally. And that's also part of where like the ability for a shuffle effect is really powerful. Like the notion of like if you can't observatory plus river to like scry something to the bottom that you don't want, that's where like the additional shuffle effects coming into play really matter. And with failed mutation in this list without the Lady of the Lake or any other shuffle effects, then we get in those positions where we can get stuck. And it's the same thing with Kelp Cavern, right? Like you can dig from the bottom and you're like, okay, well, that's on the bottom now, and I know that there's no way for me to get it out from under the bottom. So if there's something that you really want, you're like, well, that's just going to be on the bottom until the rest of this game, and that sucks.
Yeah.
Like giving yourself
and
a little.
Cavern was the other cut I made for the Deep Seas and Island Leviathans.
And I'm just thinking that like with the card draw effects of Gift and Return to Nature, that like being able to have some sort of control over those pieces, and like anytime and figuring out like we don't just deploy those things arbitrarily. Like in the early game, yes, you're going to deploy a frog because you need to get you need to actually develop. But like in the later game, you may not actually fire off a card draw because if you're also pairing it with some sort of selection effect, then you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to need this to know what I'm targeting. There's some game to be played with that, but I like think that the Island Leviathan isn't necessarily solving a problem that I've been able to identify yet, but I also haven't gotten in nearly as many reps as you have. So, like, you recognizing that Failed Mutation is a worthwhile addition, and then the Island Leviathan is a worthwhile addition. Like, I trust your judgment on these things.
So Phil, again, it's the Magic the Gathering, like old school Magic the Gathering player in me. Like we're playing, this game, we're playing old school Magic, right? So I'm playing with Morphlings and I'm playing with Standing Stones.
Yeah.
That's where my head is at. It is there. So I don't know. We'll have to see when we've got a lot of testing to do. I have create a battle box, which we'll be talking about in our Extra Sense episode this week. If you're interested in hearing us talk about the practice and battle boxes and stuff like that, and getting a little bit of extra weekly content from us, you can go to our Patreon and join our Sorcerer tier or our Magician tier, and you'll be able to get our extra content, and obviously all of our content on the Patreon is also ad free. Patreon.com/EternalDurdles. That is our mothership. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you have any other ideas as far as what could go in this deck? Things Phil or I might have missed. I'd love to hear it. Again, I really think that water is a control color and not a tempo color. Comment below. Thanks so much for watching.
No, I mean, the only other things that I would...
Hey, thanks for watching. And if you get a moment, remember to like and subscribe to the video.
Also, don't forget to join us on Patreon at patreon.com/EternalDurdles in the Magician's tier.
Your support means a lot, and it helps us keep pumping out this content. Thanks so much.
Keep contesting the realm.